For 50 years, the United States believed that Ron Howard was flawless. His image, shaped across decades of television and cinema, represented the ideal of someone who had risen from the innocence of Mayberry to the summit of Hollywood without a single misstep. Yet his most recent interview introduced a truth that reshaped that long-held perception. According to the account he shared, the life behind his calm smile was marked by decisions that had left emotional scars, a family crisis that unfolded while cameras continued to roll, and a moment on set when his own body surrendered to exhaustion. The narrative of perfection, repeated for half a century, had shielded a man who carried a private weight far heavier than the public ever suspected. The story begins long before Ron Howard became a director, a producer, or a symbol of American entertainment. It began in Duncan, Oklahoma, where he was born in 1954 to parents whose lives were already intertwined with the screen. His father, Rance Howard, had adopted his stage name in the late 1940s before serving in the Air Force, and his mother, Jean Spiegel, had trained as an actress. When Ron arrived, he entered a household where dialogue was spoken not only in conversation, but in the cadence of rehearsed lines and the movements of actors learning their craft. It was a world that shaped him before he understood what shaping meant. When he appeared on film at 18 months old, audiences saw a charming toddler, unaware of how profoundly the experience would define the rest of his life. What viewers did not see was the subtle erosion of a childhood exchanged for call sheets and camera marks, nor the quiet tension of a family betting everything on proximity to the rapidly shifting center of American television. As the Howards left Oklahoma for California, Ron entered an environment where the distance between innocence and responsibility narrowed with unusual speed. While other children learned to ride bicycles, he learned where to stand under studio lights. The momentum that followed seemed ordained. Producers, writers, and directors noticed a presence in Ron that went beyond childlike appeal. He did not perform with exaggerated sweetness, he responded with sincerity. According to early colleagues, that honesty distinguished him far more than talent alone. As the projects accumulated, the public saw a child star rising effortlessly, but the truth beneath that rise carried loneliness, pressure, and expectations that no child could articulate. These elements, unspoken for decades, were the origins of the revelations he shared in his recent interview. They were not confessions designed for shock, but acknowledgments of the private costs that accompanied the public victories. His story, once viewed as a model of stability, now appeared more complex, shaped by the shadows that had followed him across generations of audiences. But behind the glamour and the excuses, what mechanisms are really driving this crisis? We will analyze every detail, from the initial mistakes to the irreversible damage, to see how the entertainment world works and how an icon is redefined. Long before Ron Howard became a director whose name would appear on some of the most acclaimed films in American cinema, he lived a childhood shaped by circumstances that offered both opportunity and quiet emotional strain. The earliest years of his life unfolded in an environment that was less a home and more a preparation ground for a career he never consciously chose. Born into a family of actors, Ron entered a world where ambition, discipline, and performance were everyday currency. His father, Rance Howard, served as both a model and a cautionary presence, a man who balanced military service with the uncertain life of an actor. His mother, Jean Spiegel, carried her own training and performance, introducing Ron to a household where creative ambition and financial instability existed side by side. The family's move from Oklahoma to California marked a defining shift. They were not pursuing glamour or social elevation. They were pursuing proximity to the heart of an industry that was rewriting the rules of American entertainment. The Howard family packed their belongings and followed the migration of television westward, treating the journey not as a gamble but as a necessity. In this new environment, Ron stood closer to cameras than to playgrounds. While other children played in backyards, he spent his days walking among sound stages, overhearing rehearsals, and observing actors adjust their performance under bright lights. The first significant imprint on his life came with his screen debut at 18 months old. The set of Frontier Woman became an unexpected nursery, introducing him to a professional world that rewarded calmness, discipline, and emotional responsiveness. These were qualities few toddlers possessed, yet they became expectations placed on him from the start. This early immersion did not feel extraordinary to him at the time, it felt normal because it was all he knew. But as he grew older, this normalcy began to blur the line between childhood and work in ways that would shape his identity for decades. The momentum intensified when he joined Playhouse 90 and various television projects even before entering elementary school. In Burbank, his home life and professional life merged into a single structure, one in which his father managed every detail of his earnings, schedules, and opportunities. Rance Howard worked tirelessly, taking more than 140 film appearances and 177 television roles. According to later accounts, his goal was not personal fame. It was to remain close to Ron, to protect him, and to maintain a stable orbit around the unpredictable demands of Hollywood. The household functioned like a disciplined, almost self-sustaining unit where every member had a role, and Ron's role happened to be the one in front of the camera. The defining turning point of his early life arrived on October 3, 1960, when Ron, at the age of 6, appeared as Opie Taylor in The Andy Griffith Show. America responded instantly. Viewers saw a charming, earnest child, unaware that the performance resonated because it reflected something real. The handshake agreement between his father and Andy Griffith ensured that the father-son dynamic on screen would mirror their real bond. Writers adjusted scripts to reflect the authenticity of their relationship, and Ron began performing scenes grounded in emotional truths rather than manufactured sentiment. His ability to listen, breathe naturally, and respond with sincerity made him stand out from most child actors of the era. Yet the public did not see what happened off camera. Ron lived within a structure that offered affection, but little freedom. He described it years later as a golden cage, a safe environment that also confined him. California law required 3 hours of school per day, which he completed in a small classroom near Stage 40 at Desalu, Kawunga. While other children sat in noisy cafeterias and shared jokes between classes, Ron worked through math problems while Grips pushed dollies past his desk. He ate lunch with his father or the prop department, listened to Andy Griffith play guitar, and absorbed jokes from Don Knotts that were carefully chosen to be appropriate for a child. It was a life surrounded by adults who tried to make things feel normal, yet the absence of peers left him in an emotional landscape shaped by solitude. One of the most revealing moments of his early emotional development unfolded during the filming of the 1963 episode Opie the Birdman. At 9 years old, Ron was required to portray deep remorse after his character accidentally killed a bird and subsequently cared for its orphaned chicks. The performance required an emotional subtlety far beyond his years. Director Bob Sweeney completed the scene with almost no retakes. To achieve the necessary sadness, Ron relied on a technique his father had taught him: substitution. When the scene demanded grief, he recalled something personal that hurt him and allowed that feeling to guide his expression. It was a level of emotional control that most adults struggled to achieve, and it demonstrated how profoundly his upbringing had conditioned him to access and manage complex internal states. But this emotional skill came at a cost. Behind the applause and praise, Ron felt the weight of expectations that deprived him of the casual spontaneity of childhood. He never complained, because the structure around him suggested that this was simply life. Still, the longing for ordinary experiences lingered. He missed neighborhood baseball games and the freedom to ride a bicycle until sunset. These small absences formed the quiet foundation of the revelations he would share many decades later, revealing how early the conflict between public success and private sacrifice began. By understanding this foundation, one can begin to see the pattern that shaped Ron Howard long before he won awards or stepped behind the camera. The childhood that millions admired on television was real, but it was incomplete. It was shaped by love, discipline, pressure, and an emotional responsibility that no 6-year-old should have had to carry. This mixture of security and sacrifice created the internal landscape that would influence every decision, every success, and every regret that Ron later revealed. What do you think about this? Comment, amen below so we can continue with the unfinished stories. By the early 1970s, Ron Howard had reached an age that demanded transition. He was no longer the child star whose sincerity charmed the nation. He was a young man navigating the uncertain terrain between adolescence and adult responsibility, carrying with him the weight of a career that had begun long before he understood the meaning of choice. This period, marked by pivotal decisions and emerging conflicts, became the foundation for his ascent into directing, even as it exposed the emotional limitations of the image that had defined him for so long. In 1974, Ron walked into Gary Marshall's office for an audition that would alter the course of his professional life. He did not perform with exaggerated enthusiasm or excessive charm. Instead, he behaved as though he belonged in the world of the show, casually ordering a cherry phosphate and settling into the scene as if it were an extension of his daily routine. According to accounts from the production team, the authenticity of this moment distinguished him from 35 other actors competing for the role. Within minutes, Marshall recognized that Ron possessed the understated reliability necessary to anchor the ensemble. He was cast as Richie Cunningham in Happy Days, earning $7,500 per episode. For audiences, Richie represented the clean-cut, optimistic teenager of mid-century America. For Ron, however, the role increasingly revealed a dissonance between appearance and reality. By 1977, he was 23 years old but still expected to portray a boy suspended in an earlier, simpler era. Meanwhile, the world outside was in turmoil. News reports of the Vietnam War played across national broadcasts, yet the show avoided any mention of the conflict. The emotional tension this created for Ron grew steadily. He wrote a 3-page memo to ABC suggesting that the character confront the possibility of the draft, arguing that audiences deserved narratives that acknowledged the complexities of real life. The network rejected the idea, citing concerns about political risk and sponsor backlash. This moment exposed an early version of the conflict that would follow Ron for decades, the desire to tell honest stories within an industry that often preferred safe illusions. When small concessions were allowed, they appeared only in passing details, such as Richie reading a newspaper referencing the war or commenting briefly on deferments. These fragments were not enough to resolve Ron's frustration, but they confirmed his need for creative authority. That need would soon lead him toward directing. The pressure intensified when ABC attempted to rename the series Fonzie's Happy Days during the explosion of merchandise centered around Henry Winkler's character. Posters, lunchboxes, and novelty items generated approximately $50 million in sales, transforming Fonzie into a cultural phenomenon. Ron recognized the broader implications. His father, Rance, had spent years fighting for fair billing, and Ron understood that names carried both symbolic and contractual power. When ABC pushed the name change, he issued a firm ultimatum. Unless the title remained unchanged, he would leave the series. Studio, unwilling to face a potential lawsuit for breach of his $500,000 contract, compromised by keeping the name but elevating Fonzie to top billing in the credits. Ron accepted this partial victory, recognizing that influence often required strategic restraint. His first major step into directing arrived in October 1977 with the Happy Days episode A Date with Fonzie. The production budget was lean, only $10,000, and the episode demanded 32 scenes in 3 days. Ron approached the challenge with the precision of someone who had observed directors for nearly 2 decades. He prepared a meticulous shot list that drew comparisons to the work of Steven Spielberg. One notable sequence involved a 90-second tracking shot through Arnold's diner. Ordinarily, such shots required extensive rehearsal and multiple takes, but Ron completed it in 2, saving approximately $3,000. Ratings increased by 12%, indicating that audiences responded to the energy of his visual storytelling. The success encouraged ABC to assign him additional directing duties, and he received $2,500 for each episode he directed, separate from his acting salary. His former co-star Henry Winkler later remarked that Ron's directing style pushed him into deeper emotional territory, requiring performances that transcended catchphrases. While his work on Happy Days advanced his ambitions, Ron simultaneously pursued opportunities beyond the sitcom. In 1976, he starred in the low-budget action film Eat My Dust for producer Roger Corman. As part of the deal, Corman agreed to let Ron direct his next film. That opportunity became the 1977 feature Grand Theft Auto, which Ron co-wrote with his father. With a budget of approximately $602,000, the film earned $15 million and featured chaotic, destructive car sequences that reflected Ron's determination to work creatively within tight constraints. The cast included his mother, his brother Clint, and even a co-star from Happy Days, demonstrating Ron's instinct to build films around people he trusted. By the early 1980s, Ron's evolution into a director became undeniable. His 1982 film Night Shift paired Henry Winkler with newcomer Michael Keaton in a dark yet comedic story set within a New York City morgue. Despite concerns from test audiences and the MPAA about the film's risque edge, it earned $21 million from an $8 million budget. The critical response suggested that Ron possessed the ability to guide unconventional narratives without losing emotional coherence. Winkler received a Golden Globe nomination, and Keaton's performance propelled him into mainstream visibility. 2 years later, Ron directed Splash, a romantic fantasy starring Tom Hanks and Daryl Hannah. The film marked Disney's first release under the Touchstone label and earned nearly $70 million from a budget of $11 million. Daryl Hannah performed her underwater scenes without a stunt double and during extended hours in a mermaid suit that weighed approximately 35 pounds. The original ending, in which Alan remained on land while Madison returned to the sea, tested poorly with women during early screenings. After adjustments, the final scene depicted Alan diving after the mermaid, an emotional conclusion that audiences embraced. The film received critical acclaim and earned an Academy Award nomination, confirming Ron's expanding influence. In 1985, Ron and producer Brian Grazer co-founded Imagine Entertainment, an ambitious company that sought to merge film, television, and premium content at a scale rarely attempted by such young filmmakers. They took the company public and secured major partnerships with TriStar Pictures, Showtime, and the Movie Channel. Over the following decades, Imagine would accumulate more than 40 Oscar nominations and nearly 200 Emmy recognitions, establishing itself as a fixture in Hollywood's production landscape. The pursuit of realism reached new heights in 1995 with Apollo 13. Ron insisted on technical precision, acquiring authentic equipment from NASA, including mission control panels purchased from government surplus for as little as $1. To depict weightlessness, the film crew conducted 10 days of flights aboard an aircraft known as the Vomit Comet, capturing 612 zero-gravity scenes, each lasting only 23 seconds. The intensity of the production pushed Ron to his limits. He worked 18-hour days for 90 consecutive days, overseeing rehearsals, monitoring effects, and reviewing footage late into the night. The strain culminated in a physical collapse on set caused by dehydration and hypertension. Production halted for 36 hours. When he returned, the crew met him wearing shirts labeled Mission Control, an acknowledgement of both his dedication and the human toll it had taken. Apollo 13 earned $355 million and received 9 Academy Award nominations. Yet the achievement masked the exhaustion that overwhelmed him. Only a few years later, Ron directed EDTV, an $80 million satire that entered theaters shortly after The Truman Show. Critics argued that the film lacked the narrative cohesion of its predecessor, and it ultimately earned only $50 million, becoming one of Imagine Entertainment's more costly disappointments. However, the setback did not diminish his resolve. In 2001, Ron began production on A Beautiful Mind, a psychological drama that sought to immerse viewers in the subjective experience of John Nash. He chose to present Nash's hallucinations as indistinguishable from reality, allowing the audience to discover the truth alongside the character. Filming proceeded largely in chronological order, an approach that deepened emotional continuity. Despite earning more than $313 million and winning 4 Academy Awards, including Best Director, the film faced criticism for omitting controversial elements of Nash's life. The debate underscored a recurring theme in Ron Howard's career: the tension between compelling storytelling and uncompromising truth. During these years, the public saw a director ascending. What they did not see was the accumulation of pressure, the cost of perfectionism, or the physical and emotional strain that pushed Ron toward the revelations that would surface much later. The success was real, but so was the weight he carried beneath it. As Ron Howard entered the 2000s, the shape of his career appeared stable from the outside, defined by consistency, discipline, and an expanding legacy of respected films. Yet beneath that confidence existed a history of emotional weight, personal sacrifice, and unresolved regret. These silent burdens moved with him from set to set, emerging during the more turbulent chapters of his life, when the pressures of work collided with the responsibilities of family, and when losses struck with the force of a private storm. One of the deepest fractures in his emotional landscape began forming in the 1980s as his brother Clint struggled with escalating addiction. Clint had been a child actor as well, appearing in more than 200 credits, but the path that shaped Ron into a celebrated figure did not provide the same grounding for his younger brother. Hollywood rewarded Clint with visibility but denied him stability. By the late 1980s, he was consumed by cocaine and alcohol, spiraling towards self-destruction. Ron reached a point where he could no longer stand by quietly. According to their shared memoir, he told Clint directly that their relationship would not survive unless Clint chose rehabilitation. It was a moment without theatrics, without the gentle tone Ron had often adopted as the family mediator. It was an ultimatum, and it worked. Clint chose life, yet the recovery did not erase the guilt Ron carried. His own rise, he later admitted, made his brother feel overshadowed, a dynamic that lingered in both of their lives for decades. Family conflict resurfaced in a different form in 1991 when Ron made a professional decision that haunted him long after the applause faded. The production of Far and Away required him to spend 6 months filming in Ireland, the longest period he had ever been away from his wife Cheryl and their children. When he returned, his newborn daughter had changed in ways he had not witnessed, and another child barely recognized him. The moment, simple on the surface, struck him with profound force. The cost of ambition had arrived in the form of absence, measured not in missed milestones but in emotional distance. It was a decision that Ron later described as one of the most painful mistakes of his career, a realization that reshaped his commitment to future projects. He vowed not to accept extended international shoots again, a promise he kept for many years, until the demands of Cinderella Man in 2005 required him to break it. The guilt returned sharper this time because it confirmed what he had feared. Even the best intentions were vulnerable to the momentum of filmmaking. Loss deepened these internal wounds. Ron's father, Rance Howard, had been a constant presence, both in life and in nearly every artistic milestone Ron achieved. Rance appeared in Apollo 13, Splash, A Beautiful Mind, and countless other projects, not as a form of nepotism, but as a thread of continuity connecting Ron to his origins. When Rance's wife Judy passed away in early 2017, the family drew closer. Later that same year, on November 25, Rance died at the age of 89. Ron described him as a Depression-era farm boy who transformed his life through discipline and imagination. The loss struck him at a moment when his professional responsibilities remained vast, and the grief became another silent layer beneath the calm exterior he presented to the world. As Ron navigated these personal upheavals, he confronted one of the most destabilizing professional challenges of his career. In 2018, he was asked to take over Solo, a Star Wars story, after the original directors were dismissed mid-production. The task was monumental. He reshot approximately 70% of the film, shouldered the responsibility of restoring narrative coherence, and faced the intense scrutiny of a global fan base known for its uncompromising expectations. When the film underperformed at the box office, critics and audiences directed their disappointment toward the production as a whole, and Ron absorbed the impact. Years later, he disclosed that Solo brought him dangerously close to ending his directing career. The pressure, the criticism, and the emotional exhaustion rekindled old doubts about whether his success had come at too high a price. Yet a quiet turning point emerged from the person who had once barely recognized him after a long shoot. His daughter, Bryce Dallas Howard, by then an established actress and director herself, urged him not to give up. Her support, grounded in empathy and shared experience, helped him begin the slow process of rebuilding confidence. Through her encouragement, Ron found clarity in the idea that his career did not need to be defined by the outcomes of individual projects, but by the integrity he brought to each story. This clarity guided him toward a number of projects that contrasted sharply in tone and reception. In 2020, he released Hillbilly Elegy on Netflix, a film that divided critics and earned him a Razzie nomination for Worst Director. Despite the criticism, Glenn Close received multiple award nominations for her supporting role. That same year, Ron created Rebuilding Paradise, a documentary chronicling the aftermath of the catastrophic Camp Fire that destroyed 14,000 homes and claimed 85 lives. His personal connection to the town of Paradise, where his mother-in-law had lived, intensified the emotional weight of the project. The stories of loss and resilience left him shaken, and he acknowledged that the film was one of the most difficult undertakings of his career. The period that followed tested Ron's endurance once again. His 2025 feature, Eden, a survival thriller set in the Galapagos Islands, had originated from an idea he conceived 15 years earlier while on vacation. He wrote outlines on his BlackBerry, fascinated by the psychological tensions that unfold in isolated environments. The film, featuring a strong ensemble cast including Sydney Sweeney, Jude Law, Ana de Armas, Vanessa Kirby, and Daniel Bruhl, carried a budget of $55 million. Despite the ambition behind the project, it opened to only $1 million across 664 theaters. Ron described the result not as a failure, but as a painful reminder of how unforgiving the industry could be. He confessed publicly that he had already been close to quitting, and Eden intensified those doubts. Yet he continued, guided by a mixture of resilience and reflection. By 2025, he had been married to Cheryl for 50 years and had co-led Imagine Entertainment for 4 decades alongside Brian Grazer. The company had produced more than 50 films, earned 47 Oscar nominations and 289 Emmy recognitions, and contributed significantly to the cultural memory of modern cinema. Financially, Ron's net worth exceeded $200 million, but he maintained the humility that his father instilled in him. He focused on mentoring young directors, emphasizing discipline, empathy, and emotional honesty. Still, beneath the achievements and the resilience, the weight of his regrets lingered. Ron carried memories that did not fade with time: the moment his daughter did not know him, the nights when his brother's addiction threatened his life, the grief that followed his father's passing, and the collapse on the Apollo 13 set when his body signaled what his mind refused to acknowledge. These were not moments the public remembered, but they were the ones Ron could never forget. And even now, Ron Howard still wonders what parts of his life the world will never truly see. Across 5 decades, Ron Howard constructed a career that appeared to move with unusual steadiness. Hattingly, the public observed a filmmaker who guided large productions with calm authority, collaborated respectfully, and approached storytelling with a clarity that rarely wavered. Yet the journey behind that reputation reveals a more intricate portrait, shaped as much by vulnerability as by vision. His life, marked by early discipline and unexpected burdens, demonstrates how success can coexist with private fractures, and how even the most admired careers are carried by individuals who continue to wrestle with unresolved moments. In the years following his most difficult professional setbacks, Ron continued working with the same steady commitment that had defined his earliest performances. He remained a constant presence at Imagine Entertainment, shaping projects that reflected a belief in human resilience and the pursuit of second chances. Through changing trends, shifting audience expectations, and the volatility of the film industry, he maintained a perspective rooted in continuity rather than spectacle. According to colleagues, his leadership became less about asserting authority and more about mentoring younger filmmakers who needed the kind of guidance he once received from his father. His personal life moved forward with a similar quiet strength. Ron and Cheryl's 50-year marriage stood as a rare example of stability within an industry known for its transience. Their home life adhered to long-standing rules, including the agreement to avoid work discussions at the dinner table, preserving a space where family remained separate from the pressures of the industry. Their 4 children built their own paths, and Ron's decision to step back from influencing their careers reflected the lessons he had learned about autonomy, boundaries, and emotional presence. Professionally, his body of work continued to grow. Imagine Entertainment accumulated dozens of Oscar nominations and hundreds of Emmy recognitions, building a legacy that extended far beyond Ron's individual achievements. The company's influence reached across genres and platforms, contributing to projects that shaped public memory throughout several decades. Financial success followed, but Ron's focus remained on the integrity of the stories he chose to tell and the people he supported behind the scenes. As he reflected on his life, Ron often returned to the idea that artistic accomplishment and personal fulfillment do not always align. The moments he described with the most gravity were not tied to awards or milestones, but to the instances when his absence left a mark on those he loved or when the pressures of work overshadowed his well being. These recollections, shared without bitterness, suggested a man who viewed his past through the dual lenses of gratitude and regret. They also revealed an understanding that every achievement carries a cost and that the stories audiences celebrate are built on unseen complexities. The emotional clarity he expressed in recent years offered a rare perspective. Ron acknowledged the fragility of balance, the difficulty of protecting family while navigating a demanding career, and the silent toll of expectations that followed him from childhood into adulthood. His reflections did not diminish his accomplishments. Instead, they added dimension to a life that had often been simplified by public admiration. Today, Ron continues to guide new projects, mentor emerging talent, and move forward with a sense of purpose shaped by 5 decades of experience. His legacy, built through patience, discipline, and artistic empathy, stands firmly within the landscape of American cinema. Yet, even with all that has been documented, celebrated, and remembered, Ron accepts that portions of his story will remain private, carried quietly alongside the chapters the world already knows. And even now, Ron Howard still wonders what parts of his life the world will never truly see.